Half a day. I'm Diane Weiss, the Wildlife Supervisor at the Guam Department of Agriculture's Division of Aquatic and Wildlife Resources. I've been working on the Koko for Cocos project for over 15 years, and I can say without a doubt the successes of the project are due to the dedication of the DAR staff and our collaboration with many local and federal partners. Today, my task is to present the why, what, and how of continuing the Koko for Cocos project. Why is Isla Dano so special? What happened? And how are we responding to the discovery of snakes? I will provide a brief overview of Dano, the original Koko for Cocos management plan, some results from the 10 plus years of management actions, and end with the plans for control and eventual eradication of snakes from Dano. My hope is that you, the listening audience, will understand the efforts that have taken place in the wake of discovering snakes on Dano and how we will once again imagine Guam and Dano without brown tree snakes. Dano is a 33.6 hectare atoll located about 2.5 kilometers across the lagoon from Moleso in southern Guam. 75% of the island is privately owned and operated as a day resort. The Cocos Island Resort is our primary partner in the project, without whose permission the project would not have proceeded. The other 25% of the island is Dano Park, a natural area co-managed by the Guam Departments of Parks and Recreation and Agriculture. Until recently, the island was considered a snake-free oasis for many species no longer found on Guam. With the lack of deer, pigs, cats, dogs, and chickens, and a protective ocean barrier from Guam, Dano offered a unique opportunity to introduce Koko birds and allow visitors to imagine Guam without brown tree snakes. Some of the highlights of Dano include naturally regenerating native forest. Without browsing deer and rooting pigs, native tree seedlings are able to flourish. Dano is home to one of two primary Guam populations of the locally endangered sali. There are 3 species of nesting seabirds, black and brown noddies and white terns. Dano is home to 14 species of lizards, including the only Guam population of Amoya sleveni, a locally and federally listed species. As well, there are nesting endangered sea turtles. Dano, the home of these native species, is definitely worth protecting and preserving. The original Koko for Cocos project planning started in 2004 and was funded by an Office of Insular Affairs Brown Tree Snake Technical Assistance Grant. The plan became part of a safe harbor agreement signed in 2008 between the Fish and Wildlife Service, Cocos Island Resort, and the Government of Guam Departments of Agriculture and Parks and Recreation. At the time, there was a $265,000 grant associated with the Safe Harbor Agreement. The primary goal of the project was to establish a breeding population of Koko. 26 captive bred Koko birds were released on Dano and have since successfully bred and spread throughout the island. There have been over 70 nests found through tracking these secretive birds. Just recently, a nest successfully hatched 2 chicks. As mentioned before, the success of the Koko for Cocos project has relied on the collaboration and funding from many partners. The initial planning was funded by an Office of Insular Affairs BTS Technical Assistance Grant, and the initial management activities by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Non-Traditional Section 6 Safe Harbor Agreement Grant. Biosecurity planning was funded through an Aquatic Nuisance Species Grant. A U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Traditional Section 6 grant funded research associated with the planning of the rodent eradication. The USDA Wildlife Services funded a portion of that rodent eradication when the project was delayed. USDA Forest Service and Guam Ag's Forest and Soil Resources Division funded forest enhancement activities. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service State Wildlife Grant Program funded lizard surveys and monitor lizard control. Guam Visitors Bureau supported the Koko release ceremony. Guam Telephone Authority provided a hotline, and the Pacific Daily News provided an ink for the biosecurity rodent monitoring stations. Koko for Cocos is a great demonstration of partnerships and cost sharing. Today, funding for the Koko for Cocos project management activities is provided by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Wildlife Restoration and Basic Hunter Education Program. This includes native and migratory bird monitoring, predator control, and biosecurity. Wildlife restoration funding is a formula-based grant that provides funding to state fish and game offices to conduct conservation activities in support of native wildlife and game species. The funds are collected from excise taxes that are paid by manufacturers of guns, ammunition, archery, equipment, and accessories. I tucked that picture of Tino releasing a Koko in because I noticed he's been tuning into the conference. Tino was there to release the birds on Cocos Island, and he was also there to collect the last of the birds in the wild. Tino retired last August quietly during COVID. Thank you, Tino, for 30 years of service. The Office of Insular Affairs has supported the Koko for Cocos project since day one. We've had multiple years of awareness projects associated with Dano. The first campaigns, Go Native and What Would Chetlu Do, focused on developing public appreciation for the Koko and other native species to encourage visitors to follow biosecurity protocols. Our mascot, Chetlu, encouraged visitors to check their boats and never pack a pest to protect Guam's native species. Under the current Contra y Culebra campaign, or KIC for short, we have had school and community groups visit Dano to experience this natural oasis for native species and imagine Guam without brown tree snakes. The visitors learn about invasive species, their impacts to native species, and the actions necessary to recover Guam's native flora and fauna. The trips include a hike or a cleanup to see the island and hear about the ongoing management activities. After lunch, there are usually a few fun activities to reinforce concepts. During the rodent eradication, it became apparent that the general public needed a greater understanding of the tools used to control invasive species, particularly chemical methods. Under the KIC campaign, Dano will continue to serve as a demonstration site where the public can see Guam's native species and learn about invasive species control across landscapes. So that is the why. Why Dano is important, and the Koko for Cocos project should continue into phase 2. The next question is what? What happened and what was the response? If we go back prior to COVID, in February 2020, there was a snake shed found draped over a tree branch on Dano. In response to the finding, DAR and USGS visited the site, took water samples to test for eDNA, and set some traps baited with dead rodents to see if we could catch a snake. The trap effort barely got started prior to the first government shutdown in March. The resort shuttle service to Dano was closed and government employees were not allowed to leave the house. In September 2020, amid COVID restrictions, a fisher person reported to DAR that they had killed snakes on Dano. Wildlife personnel spoke with the individual to confirm the story and contacted the USGS BTS Rapid Response Team. They conducted interviews with the individuals reporting the snakes, and following those interviews, the USGS Rapid Response Team initiated a response. Snakes were visually detected and removed the first night of searching. About that same time, USDA and WRC initiated a non-target bait take study on Dano. This work was initially planned for Saipan. However, due to COVID, arrangements were made to conduct the study on Dano, a snake-free area with birds, monitors, and crabs. The initial results showed that no snakes were found to be attracted to the standard dead baits used in snake control tools. Now that is troubling. A small group of BTS Technical Working Group members started meeting on Fridays to discuss the results of visual survey removals and the lack of interest in food-based lures. Usually when I think of operational snake control, I think of snake traps and bait stations, or possibly dropping acetaminophen-laced mice. My last resort would be to send people out in the dark looking for snakes. However, when visual surveys were showing the best results, the plan shifted to using visual surveys for operational snake control. It is important to note at this point that throughout this time, USGS continued their efforts to remove the snakes with permission under current funding and emergency consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In February 2021, COVID restrictions were eased and DAR was able to resume management activities on Dano. This included predator control, biosecurity, and bird monitoring. The Sali population on Dano was surveyed 3 times in rapid succession, each survey indicating approximately 50 individuals. When compared to historical bird surveys on Dano, the population seems to be on a decline. However, it is difficult to see how quickly the population is declining, as the previous surveys were conducted annually without repetition. It is difficult to be certain of those point counts. Koko surveys also resumed. The first census using playbacks received 23 responses, which, based on the secrecy of the rails with a 50% response rate, the population could be estimated at around 46. The previous survey in fall 2019 estimated about 40 Koko. Looking ahead, the frequency and intensity of bird monitoring will be increased. In FY22, the Sali and Koko on Dano will be monitored using radio telemetry, cameras on nests, and sightings of banded birds to indicate survivorship in the presence of a snake population under operational control. These initial baseline surveys and monitoring data will provide indicators to monitor the success of snake removal efforts. As operational control is conducted over time, we hope to see a rise in the Sali population. The Sali would be the most sensitive and easiest prey species to monitor as an indication of success. Again, it should be noted that these immediate responses were conducted with previously secured funding and complete compliance under the federal ESA and NEPA. The third and final question is how? How do we proceed? The increase in monitoring of native species on Dano will continue through FY22 and beyond. Biosecurity protocols and kick awareness will be increased through the implementation of a volunteer corps of visual searchers. The volunteer program will complement the current Contra Eculepla campaign by garnering support for the protection of native species by controlling snakes on Dano. An operational visual survey project is currently planned to start within the confines of the current trail system on Dano. Once federal compliance documents are completed, the trail system on Dano will be expanded to assist with searching more areas of the island. These initial efforts to remove snakes are focused on saving the Sali population. If we can control the snakes enough to allow the Sali to persevere, we can buy the time necessary to create a feasible eradication plan for the removal of snakes from Dano. Saving this small population of Sali that have withstood the BTS invasion on Guam is definitely a worthwhile venture. Thank you for listening. And thank you to everyone who has assisted in any way, shape, or form in the protection of Guam's natural resources for our future generations. Thank you, and I'll take questions if there's time.